Success is not a destination. It's a never-ending process. One great Christian put it this way: success is not determined by what we are, but rather by what we are compared to what we could be. It's not measured by what we've done, but rather by what we've done compared to what we could have done. The Apostle Paul uses athletic language in his writings. The words press on and reaching forward and goal and prize are all racing terms. The Christian life is a race. And in a race, where you've been isn't as important as where you are and where you're headed. There's power and potential and promise within each one of us that's just waiting to be unleashed. God's plan is that we be more and do more than any of us could ever imagine. Now, if anybody could give us evidence on what we can do to achieve a new, vibrant, victorious life as individuals and the church, it's the Apostle Paul. Listen to his words. But this one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind and pressing unto those things which were before. I press toward the mark of the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. Now, if you wanted to write out a prescription for victorious living in just a few memorable words, it would be forget, focus, and finish. Forget the past. Winston Churchill said, if the present quarrels with the past, there is no future. Paul was determined not to let his past hinder his present or hurt his future. And when Paul says, forget those things that are behind, he's making a divided point. He starts the passage with what some theologians call his pedigree. If anyone had a right to be proud of himself, it was Saul of Tarsus, who became Paul. He was circumcised on the 8th day, exactly according to the law. He was an Israelite from the tribe of Benjamin. He was a Hebrew of Hebrews, a highly educated, practicing Pharisee. He stood his ground and actively persecuted the church in Jerusalem and as far away as Damascus because it went against the accepted teachings of his faith. And as far as the law is concerned, he says, I am blameless. Now, we might point out that his ego was a little enlarged, but all in all, Saul was a good man, respected and dedicated to his faith. But he had to forget all of that. He had to forget past guilt. Saul was a murderer, a blasphemer, and a persecutor of the church in the eyes of God. Now, some people are so concerned over the past that they destroy their future. They can't quit looking back. That could have happened to Saul. He could have let his guilt over persecuting the church prevent him from giving his best. You know, guilt is a strange phenomenon. It's much more powerful in our lives than most of us realize. I heard the other day about a little boy who during a blackout was acting very guilty. And when his parents asked him what was wrong, he broke down and cried, confessing that on the way home from school, he kicked a power pole. And he was just sure that his action had darkened an entire city. Psychologists use the term scruples to describe the person whose sense of guilt over past deeds tends to restrict future accomplishments. The word scruple is derived from an ancient, very ancient Latin word, which I won't even try to pronounce. But it's a small pebble. You know those small pebbles that get lodged inside your shoe and give us pain as we walk. So a scrupulous person, as he walks through life, feels the doubts and the pain of imagined guilt. So how do we deal with such guilt? Well, in Native American culture, one way of dealing with emotional pain is to dig a hole in the ground, lie down on your stomach, and speak out loud into the hole all of your negative thoughts, as well as your fears, your frustrations, discomforts, and anger. And then you cover the hole with dirt to bury those stressful emotions. Now, most of us would feel a little bit silly doing that kind of thing. Maybe it would be a good exercise for us. After all, if God can forgive us, surely it's time we forgive ourselves. Our biggest problem is that we remember what God forgets, and we forget what God wants us to remember. Saul didn't let his past hinder his future. So he changed his name to Paul. And as Paul, he had been beaten, shipwrecked, scorned, left for dead, alienated, ostracized by his family, mistreated, betrayed, lied to, and lied about. So he had to forget past grief, past grudges, and past indignities. Some of you will remember a pitcher for the New York Yankee Mets, for the New York Mets, by the name of David. You can tell where my loyalties lie. By the name of David Cone. In a game against the Atlanta Braves, the batter hit to the first baseman, and Cone had to run and cover first base. And the umpire ruled the runner safe. And Cone was exasperated, and he just thoroughly exploded. And turning his back to the infield, he began a shouting match with the umpire. And as the teammates yelled, Cone went on shouting and holding the ball, and 2 Atlanta Brave runners came home safely. People do stupid things when they let past insults and injuries color the present. But Paul also had to forget past glory. At this point in his life, as far as the church was concerned, Paul had become the toast of the town. He was a spiritual superstar. But Paul had learned a tremendous lesson. You can't focus on where you're going until you forget where you've been. It's not that we never recall the past. There's no way we could or even should totally erase the past from our memory. Some historian has said that if we forget the past, we are destined to relive it. The word forget literally means to not be influenced negatively by something. Paul said he counted all his earthly accomplishments, those things that he had accomplished as a Hebrew rabbi and activist, and those that he accomplished as a follower and a missionary for Christ, as loss. Literally translated, they were nothing more than trash. Now, I have a bad habit. I have a lot of bad habits, but this one is pretty bad. When I'm working on something, I keep every scrap of paper, every note, everything I print out of the printer, even the things that have mistakes on them, because I just might need it. And sometimes it all gets mixed up with the other things on my desk, and it doesn't get thrown away. And things pile up. And before long, I can't find what I need because there's so much trash on my desk. Trash gets in the way of productivity. Dispose of the trash, whether it's guilt or accomplishment, so that it doesn't affect the present negatively. You can't sail into the future with joy and peace if your anchor's stuck in the mud of the past and your boat is tied to the dock. And you can't run forward if you're always looking back. So forget the past and focus on the goal. Paul's life had a focus. He wrote, "This one thing I do." Most of us make the mistake of trying to do too many things. Paul's life was focused on Christ. That's how he had such an impact on his own time and on ours. In every walk of life, successful people are focused people. They know what they want. They know where they're headed. Nothing deters them. And all their thoughts and energies are aimed in the direction of their dreams. If you want a workable definition of sin, it might be this. It could be anything that distorts our focus, that causes us to stray from God's goal for our lives, that saps our energy, that demeans our reputation, that trivializes our purpose. We find ourselves tired and frustrated and angry and depressed, and we don't know why. It's because we're not focused on something worthy of our ambitions. A river that flows between two banks, heading in one direction, can become a tremendous source of electric power. But if it overflows its banks and goes in every direction, it becomes a stagnant swamp. That phrase, "one thing," is a very important phrase in the Bible. When the rich young ruler came to Jesus and asked, "How can I be saved?" Jesus said, "One thing you lack." When Martha was arguing with Mary over what was really important in life, Jesus said to Martha, "One thing is needed." David said in Psalm 27:4, "One thing I have desired of the Lord." And Jesus provides us with the one thing on which we are to focus. It's the title of the sermon, Le Globe. Love God, love others. And when we focus our lives there, that's what we have. The glow of Christ. And people are drawn to us like moths to a flame. Forget the past. Focus on the goal. And then we need to finish the course. As individuals and the church, if we want to make the rest of our lives the best of our lives, we can never be satisfied with what we are. We have to constantly be moving on. There's always more we can do and more we can be for the glory of God. Rascal Flatts summed up this last point pretty well. In the song they sang, "I dealt with my ghost and faced all my demons, finally content with a past I regret. I found you find strength in your moments of weakness. For once, I'm at peace with myself. I've been burdened with blame, trapped in the past for too long. I'm moving on." Forget, focus, and finish. Winston Churchill was a bit of a rascal. But I kind of like rascals. And there's an incident in his life that I want to leave you with this morning. It was in the critical days of World War II, and England faced the need for increased coal production. So Churchill called a meeting of the labor forces and the leaders to give them facts and enlist their support. He made a powerful and impassioned speech. And he closed his presentation by picturing for the group a parade that would be certainly held in Piccadilly Circus after the war. First, he said, came the men of the Royal Navy, whom everyone knew had kept the vital sea lanes open. And then the army who'd come from Dunkirk in defeat and had gone on to defeat Rommel in Africa and to fight under Montgomery in Berlin. And after them came the Air Force, who'd driven the enemy forces out of the sky and beaten them at their own game. And then he said, last of all, there would come a great host of sweat-stained, soot-streaked miners. And someone from the crowd would say, where were you? And from 10,000 throats would come the answer, we were deep in the earth in the mines, with our face against the coal. And the crowd went wild. And the man at the top had shown the power of a purpose and the need for a goal, and how everyone working together could finish in victory. And it was that and almost that alone that enabled Britain to survive. Some happy day, a parade will be held in the land that is fairer than day. And first into view will be disciples and leaders who protected the church in times of great persecution. And then there will follow the early church fathers, the writers of history and dogma, wise men who built our foundation and pride. And then the army of saints who lived and who died in total devotion to Jesus will pass to the cheers of the crowd. And then the reformers and teachers, the Calvins, the Luthers, the Wesleys, the Campbells, the Stones, who restored our faith when we strayed. We'll see Troy Perry and Mother Teresa, and Abraham, Martin, and John, who stood at the head of the battle for truth, equality, justice, and peace. And then, last of all, comes a great host of people. Diversity played out in color, in language, in gender, in things you can see and things you cannot. And a voice from the crowd will cry out, "Who are you?" And from thousands of throats will come the answer, "We're the people of God, touched by the love of one little church in West Texas." Amen. Amen.